But thank you, Dr. Allums. We owe you and Dr. Larry Allums a great deal of thanks for your creative and heroic nurturing and development of this remarkable institution. The envy of all our visitors who come here from other cities. Now, both of these heroes, Dr. Claudia and Dr. Larry, received their doctorates studying the great books at the University of Dallas in the Institute of Philosophic Studies. They've gone on to their programs here on Ruth Street to offer programs for teachers and other adults in a unique and extraordinary institution now celebrating its 28th year of existence. We owe both of them thanks for their selfless devotion, and it's our hope that some sort of institute like this one can be established in other cities across the nation. So let's give them a hand now. I want to begin by saying what I most wish to emphasize, and that is that the official authorities of teachers has been sadly diminished in the past century. But even so, their moral and spiritual authority is indestructible. And by spiritual authority, I'm not referring to anything connected with religion. I mean the ability to testify to the full dimensions of reality, to witness to the enduring vitality of our myths and memories, our past, our history, which ought really to be sacred. The Greeks had a word for that region of memory where heroes and great events reside. They called it kleos, K-L-E-O-S. And though they meant by that word something like fame, they did not at all mean what we understand today by that concept. For one thing, kleos was timeless. It was a dimension of memory and mystery attached to human events, and just as real as empirical data. A people without access to this realm of heroic lore is badly hampered in its quest for greatness. And teachers are the high priests of this region of communal memory. Without teachers, only bits and pieces of it can emerge into ordinary life, and perhaps in distorted form. Remember that I'm not speaking of religion, which is something else entirely with its own tremendous importance. But I'm speaking of the aura of mystery that surrounds ordinary reality, which is the teacher's duty to unconceal, as the philosopher Heidegger would speak of human attempts to reveal hidden truths. And because I myself have spent a long lifetime of teaching, and from the vantage point of universities have viewed with dismay what has been happening in public schooling during that lifetime, with facts and measurement and testing increasingly diminishing the full reality of our glorious and mysterious universe. I want to speak this evening without caution. I want to speak of this realm of mystery surrounding our ordinary lives, the ignoring of which is having deleterious effects on our national destiny. Now, this realm is what Keats discovered in his Ode to a Nightingale. In this poem, the poet, after following his aching heart in a drowsy numbness, as he said, enters a dark wood where he hears the nightingale sing. The bird carries within its voice the living past. Thou wast not born for death, immortal bird, the poet declares. And through its untroubled song, Keats can commune with that past, which includes the highest and the lowest, emperor and clown, as he says, perhaps even Ruth of the Old Testament. who in choosing to stay with Naomi forsook her own people, so that at times she stood in tears amid the alien corn. These presences, available to the poet only at a precious select moment, are the answer to Keats's melancholy, testifying to the value of the human enterprise. They're undeniably real, able to be given form, however, only through poetic insight, though even poets have difficulty gaining access to such revelation in a time of widespread belief in only facts and processes. Only the teacher, as a kind of shaman, as a nightingale, can guide her pupils toward a region where these presences exist, in the dark wood of shared human memory. Now, having said this, however, we must admit that in our time, the teacher's ability to be a conduit for these shadowy presences goes largely unrecognized. Our society wants teachers to instruct students in practical matters, how to be adept in current procedures, so that the next generation can take over patterns and processes that are already in existence. Thus, the task of a teacher is seen to be a work of relevancy, instruction in skills necessary to maintain the status quo, rather than induction into a timeless realm of creative thought. The teacher's traditional role of spiritual guide, then, already shaken in the past century by dubious educational theory, has been in our time all but diminished. This determination on the part of both educational authorities and the general public to reduce learning to practical skills is likely to raise questions concerning the necessity of having teachers at all, except to handle electronic media, making their role that of facilitator rather than teacher. Parents show diminishing respect for the school system in general, and less for its faculty. The curriculum is largely in the hands of administrators rather than teachers. An increased emphasis on standardized testing reduces the instructional role even further to educational clerk or drill master. The glory and depth of language has been considerably diminished out of fear of violating political correctness. And a casual remark may cost a teacher her job, as may a good-humored pat on the shoulder. Further, Facebook threatens to render formal instruction superfluous. In general, we must say that the moral and spiritual authority of educational institutions has been increasingly diminished, with teachers beginning to feel their roles obsolete, since their influence on the instructional system seems minimal. Many of them are given little control of their curricula and unable to see any hope for real change in our troubled times. Even the most committed among them are tempted to view their dedication as irrelevant. But despite all this misunderstanding of the role of teachers, and I'm speaking primarily of public school teachers because the public schools in America are tremendously important to our national destiny. So as I'm saying, despite all this misunderstanding of the role of teachers, to ask what authority they have is a little like asking the same question about mothers or fathers. The teacher's authority is one of those ancient immemorial verities, like a parent's, that we ought to take for granted, trusting that it's simply in the nature of things. Poets over the centuries have given us images of the teacher's stature: the Titan, Prometheus, the satyrs, the goddess Athena, the archetypal wise old man in so many myths and legends, from Merlin, the wizard of the Arthurian legends, on up to Prospero in The Tempest, and on to Sam Fathers in Faulkner's Go Down Moses. And in all of these accounts, the teacher is connected with a kind of magic, or at least some sort of occult powers. This sorcery is an important symbol, for in signifying the ability to enchant, it points to another dimension in the ordinary. But after the great wizard Merlin goes underground, and Prospero, standing on the brink of modernity, renounces his art, the later teacher figures have had to work with something less overtly magical. Richard Wilbur's poem, Merlin Enthralled, expresses this loss. It pictures the devastation of the Knights of the Round Table after their desertion by the magician Merlin. According to Mallory, this great magician had become enamored of a sorceress named Nignan and had allowed himself at her bidding to enter a cave before her, whereupon she entombed him in it forever. He's still there. Thus, the magic of the world has been locked away. And Wilbur's poem portrays the devastation felt by the Knights of the Round Table at the loss of that entire dimension of mystery and magic, represented by Merlin. Listen to selections from that poem by Richard Wilbur, which describes the effect of that loss as it is first realized by the Knights of the Round Table, and it's called Merlin Enthralled. After a while, they rose and went out aimlessly riding, leaving their drained cups on the table round. Merlin, Merlin, their hearts cried, where are you hiding? In all the world was no unnatural sound. And the poem goes on, describing the way in which the knights long for something more than the merely natural, an enhancement that Merlin's magic brought to the world. Once by a lake edge, it continues, something made them stop. Yet what they found was the thumping of a frog, bugs skating on the shut water top, some hair-like algae bleaching on a log. And after realizing that all their search for the magical could reveal only the natural, denuded of its full dimension, they must sadly admit fate would be fated. Dreams desire to sleep. This the forsaken will not understand. Arthur upon the road began to weep and said to Gawain, remember when this hand once hailed a sword from stone. Now no less strong, it cannot dream of such a thing to do. Their mail grew quainter as they clopped along. The sky became a still and woven blue. So we have that picture of these active knights of the Round Table, and Arthur could once hail a sword from stone, but they're turning into a kind of tapestry now of the past. So Merlin is lost to us. Ours is an age of unbelief in mystery. So teachers have to find an equivalent for this magic that can enable the young to pull swords from stones. For some of us, it's the great books, whose spell is just as potent today as ever. And as you see in your reading for this evening, for Sam Fathers of Faulkner's Go Down Moses, the magic is the tribal lore of the old people, as he calls them, the old people, who, though they have died, have not quitted the earth. Listen to what Cass says to Isaac after the boy has shot his first deer and has seen what looked like the phantom of a huge buck walk out of the wilderness. Cass goes ahead to tell him that all that must be somewhere. And he's not talking about another world like heaven. He's talking about the physical world, this world we inhabit, our memory and our past. And he talks about how flesh loves the earth and wants to stay around it. Some part of it wants to stay around it. And he says, but the boy then speaks up and says, but there's plenty of room for them and us too. There's plenty of places still unchanged. And the boy says, we want them too. We want them too. There's plenty of room for us and for them too. They have to go somewhere, as Cass says. We have to have somewhere in our imaginations for Merlin and the great deer and the old people. Cass and Isaac are not speaking of heaven, as I say. They're speaking of a dimension that surrounds our visible world, an aura, the spiritual presences without which our lives are diminished. What this implies is that what we are making on this earth has about it some permanence in myth and memory. It needs to be passed down. It remains, rendering the human enterprise supremely valuable, and in some way it must be taught to our young and carried forward in their lives, or else they live in a denuded world devoid of what Faulkner called the old verities, the intangibles. We've been living in a pragmatic epoch for so long that such talk tends to sound weird. But all our great artists testify to this invisible dimension in life. And just as priests and ministers preside over the things in our experience that are of another world, so teachers preside over a spiritual dimension present in this life, one embedded in memory and myth, a necessary part of the human image, even if encountered only in high moments. Teachers have to have some symbol of this spiritual realm to which learning takes us. They have to have some sort of power to induce a mystery. But in a radically neutralized world, they're allowed to use their occult power less and less until finally it disappears. Yet though teachers are increasingly prevented from exercising their full magical powers, and I'm speaking metaphorically, of course, but they are prevented from using their full powers in our schools, we can say at the outset that they are not and cannot be considered mere educational tools or drill masters. They bear a responsibility to the human race that is neither mechanical nor biological. They're emissaries for a heritage other than the DNA structure of the family. Thus it might be said they provide a way to rise above fate. No, your DNA seems to be your fate, and teachers provide a way to rise above that. And in the same way, they're not part of the political establishment. Their work is to impart not official knowledge, subject to the politics of the day, but a timeless heritage, a body of wisdom belonging to the human race, which teachers alone transmit. Now this is a strong statement, which I must admit seems on the face of it highly questionable. Surely learned scholars, writers, readers of every sort could be said to access this body of knowledge. But let's think about it for a moment. Teachers represent. Now, I'm not meaning that they possess, but they know about and beckon toward an entire body of knowledge. They are a connection to it by their very act of commitment, no matter how inadequate their own education may be. Through their very dedication to the task of learning, they have a bridge to another world, we might say, which, like magic, they used for the purpose of transporting others. So it's not facts or any sort of ready-made knowledge that makes the effective teacher. Mechanical means can possibly handle better the transmission of facts, but it's a commitment to and a faith in intangibles, qualities, moral and spiritual values that ride on the back of the information being taught. It's these signals of transcendence that the teacher gives out, an awareness of an arena of spiritual wisdom. And I keep having to protest that I'm not speaking of religion, but of an invisible quality present in the physical world around us, the sacramental dimension that matter possesses and that history embodies. This spiritual perception is necessary to the body politic. In fact, it's irreplaceable in producing free persons. And though this repository of wisdom to which teachers bear witness is referred to in books or manuscripts and accessible to private individuals, is through teachers that its life is preserved and constantly explored. Only the teacher approaches this wisdom not to possess it, but to be a witness to it and to point toward it, to profess that it exists. I do not mean to argue that teachers have or even should have encyclopedic knowledge. I'm suggesting that as teachers, they have faith in the transforming power of the realm of intangibles to which they bear witness. For they're members of a profession and a calling that guards a cumulative body of knowledge. As when we consult doctors, we accept the fact that their authority stems from their representing the whole history of medicine. Just as the lawyer represents the great tradition of law, and so forth. These professionals do not speak simply for themselves, but for the profession that they represent. And so it is with teachers. Wisdom, knowledge, invisible presences lie behind them. The discipline represented by the teacher is the tradition of learning, which has the power to transform. And we don't think about that often enough, that power to transform those who encounter it. And the transformation, the magic worked by teachers, satisfies a necessary need in society. Now this need is the why and wherefore of banks and farms, as General Compton declares in the short story, The Bear. And he means our economic destiny depends, on this wisdom. And we're seeing a great deal of that being tested in our time today. The practical world depends on the professions. Without lawyers, a society would certainly still have to try to arbitrate, to make just rulings, as it would have to make medical diagnoses without doctors. But those decisions would be erratic and difficult, some brilliant and some misguided. The same may be said of the teaching profession. People can learn without it, and certainly will nowadays, from the World Wide Web. But without a teacher, their learning is likely to be erratic. Some of it enlightening, but a great deal of it misleading and even dangerous. What I suppose I'm saying with all these words is that teachers are members of a heretofore respected profession, that their concern for learning is a concern for others, and hence a service to the community, that society can't do without them, and that what they profess, apart from the specifics they're teaching, is the moral and spiritual wisdom necessary for the survival of our civilization. Individuals can no doubt make contact with this vast reservoir of achieved knowledge on their own, but its full volume, and in a sense its public dimension, are lost if we ignore those who take as their life work its dissemination. It's not that teachers know all that wisdom, but that they believe it exists. And the perspective that the classroom generates is a long memory, free of the prejudices of the day. This is why it is a violation to politicize the classroom. Its serene air offers a larger view of reality than the immediately relevant. The classroom opens up a timeless perspective. It was in the classroom that Melville's masterpiece Moby Dick, having been dismissed by readers and reviewers, was seen to be what it is, one of the world's classics. It was in the classroom, it still is, that Shakespeare is kept alive, even though sporadic performances of his works are produced on stage. Milton would be a rarity indeed, were not Paradise Lost still studied in the schools. Without the teacher, lyric poetry would vanish entirely, except from diaries and badly written love notes. And where would Faulkner be if it were not for the teacher? On only a few shelves, we might well conjecture. Teachers guard, interpret, and transmit the treasures of their discipline. Now, I'm speaking primarily of literature, since that is my discipline, the one that I've taken to heart and that has guided my thought. But what I'm saying applies as well to other fields. Without the teaching profession, we would lose general literacy, not only in the verbal, but also the mathematical realm. We've already lost historical literacy among the young because we've subverted that discipline into something called social science and have stripped it of any meaningful values. If we completely relinquish our connection with the literary classics, we are deliberately choosing our downfall as a noble people. Now, the authority of teachers comes then not from their having an extraordinary large body of information themselves, but from a commitment to the preservation of their discipline, to putting on its perspective, consenting to be its medium, and using whatever spiritual powers are available to effect its transmission. Teachers are the bearers of something they consider more significant than themselves, more important than any method, something of enormous value to the culture. They believe in magic. They believe that people can be changed, and they make themselves vehicles for this transformation. They transmit, attempting to become less and less their private personal selves, and more the conveyor of what they bear across to others. There are many metaphors for them. Socrates called teachers midwives, which is a good figure for at least part of their task. But I should prefer to think of them as guides, for they do not simply bring to birth something already present in the pupil, as the idea of the midwife would indicate, but something unawakened. Though this is something, they don't do that just bring something that's present but unawakened, but they actually conduct their students into new territory. First, having imported, as it were, postcards from that territory into the classroom. Certainly, to respond further to Socrates' midwife image, we can agree that teachers bring a new entity to birth in their pupils. What happens to them is internal, not external. But I would argue that teachers are able to beckon their students to a new kind of knowledge, something not innate, something not already in the pupil, but stemming from another territory, not simply a memory hidden deep within their souls, but an enhancement that transforms. If teachers are the bearers of what is worth saving from the past, what they convey is memorable, because in it is a record of humanity exceeding itself. That's what's recorded. That's what's remembered. A wisdom and a craft, which when it's conveyed to the young in the present, produces some sort of alchemy that we might call, with the poet Keats, soul-making. It might be said that this then, soul-making, is what the Greeks called paideia, and that this is the occupation of teachers. even when they are drilling their pupils in facts and skills. In one of the oldest stories we have of the teacher, Aeschylus's Prometheus Bound, we're told that Prometheus, the Titan, took pity on human beings in their ignorance. He says, I found them witless and gave them the use of their wits and made them masters of their minds. For men at first had eyes, but saw to no purpose. They had ears, but did not hear. Like the shapes of dreams, they dragged through their long lives and handled all things in bewilderment and confusion. So Prometheus taught them all the arts and crafts. Now, the interesting aspect of this story, based on the ancient mythological fable, is that Prometheus' crime is also described as stealing fire from the gods. Apparently, in order to teach the various skills, he brought to the human race decay, the divine fire, intellect, or right judgment, which had been formerly Zeus's alone. He taught these pitiful humans not only techne, which is craft, technique, but decay, intellect. Now, what the fable seems to say, what it seems to hint at any rate, is first the lack of separation between intellect and technology, indicating that skills have to be informed by right judgment. And second, that the human race is changed in kind by possessing the divine fire of understanding, which is not innate, but must be transmitted. Prometheus is our archetypal image of the teacher, someone who gives his life so that humankind can have decay and techne. And Socrates, too, gives his life for teaching. And in the work that is our subject this evening, portions of Faulkner's Go Down Moses, you see Isaac McCaslin, the heir of the wealthy plantation owners, being taught both skills and wisdom, so that decay and techne is being taught him from the beginning by Sam Fathers, the son of a Native American and a Creole woman. In the story of the old people, the boy kills his first deer with his mentor at his side. And Sam says to him, don't walk up to him in front. If he ain't dead, he'll cut you all to pieces with his feet. Walk up to him from behind and take him by the horn first, so you can hold his head down until you can jump away. So the skills and the technique are being taught to him. The boy did that, drew the head back and the throat taut, and drew Sam Father's knife across the throat. And Sam stooped and dipped his hands in the hot, smoking blood and wiped them back and forth across the boy's face. And he had nothing to do now but stand straight and not let the trembling show. Did he do all right, Sam? His cousin McCaslin said. He done all right, Sam Father said. The boy has passed his exam. And as with all exams, he doesn't really need a grade. He simply needs to know that he done all right. We're told that Sam has spent long hours preparing Isaac for this moment. He taught the boy the woods, to hunt, when to shoot and when not to shoot, when to kill and when not to kill, and better what to do with it afterward. So such skills are all important to the boy, but they go hand in hand with a different kind of instruction, more important. Sam taught Isaac how to see and respect the presences, the spiritual voices of the wilderness that represent the body of mystery of which the teacher is guardian. The boy would just wait and then listen, and Sam would begin talking about the old days and the people, whom he had not had time ever to know, and so could not remember. And as he talked about those old times and those dead and vanished men of another race from either that the boy knew, gradually to the boy, those old times would cease to be old times and would become a part of the boy's present, not only as if they had happened yesterday, but as if they were still happening. The men who walked through them, actually walking in breath and air and casting an actual shadow on the earth that they had not quitted. And it would finally seem that it was he, the boy, who was the guest here, and Sam Father's voice was the mouthpiece of the host. I know of no passage in all literature that more fully captures the kind of magic the study of the classics works in their students. The great figures out of these works take over. When we bring Achilles into the classroom, he dominates the space and terrifies us. We ourselves are as mesmerized by Helen as the elders of Troy who view her as she walks by them on the ramparts of their besieged city. Odysseus charms us with his mind like the gods. Hamlet and Lear are so imposing that we come to feel that we're their guests and might just be considered intruders. What the boy learns is not tailored to his preferences or his abilities. Rather, he has to take in the material, have an openness to it, accommodate himself to it, measure up to it. The wilderness is the symbol for this numinous presence, for which the boy must be readied. To him, not yet ready to enter it, yet, but watching the hunters disappear into it, the wilderness seems brooding, secret, tremendous, almost inattentive. By the time he's allowed to go on the bear hunt with the men, we're told he had already inherited then, without ever having seen it, the old bear with one trap-ruined foot, that in an area almost 100 miles square had earned for himself a name, a definite designation like a living man. In the boy's imagination, from having been taught, it ran in his knowledge before he ever saw it. It loomed and towered in his dreams before he even saw the unaxed woods, where it left its crooked print, shaggy, tremendous, red-eyed, not malevolent, but just big. It was as if the boy had already defined what his sense and intellect had not encompassed yet. That doomed wilderness, whose edges were being constantly and punily gnawed at by men with plows and axes who feared it because it was wilderness, men myriad and nameless, even to one another, in the land where the old bear had earned a name, and through which ran not even a mortal beast, but an anachronism, indomitable and invincible, out of an old, dead time, a phantom, epitome, an apotheosis of the old wild life which the little puny humans swarmed and hacked at in a fury of abhorrence and fear, like pygmies about the ankles of a drowsing elephant. The old bear, solitary, indomitable, and alone, widowed, childless, and absolved of mortality. Old Priam, reft of his old wife, and outlived all his sons. Now we can see from this passage that the boy has had two sources for his education, a classical one, no doubt given him by his uncle, Cass Edmonds, in which he's read the Iliad. He identifies the old bear in his wilderness, which is fated to fall with old Priam, the king of the doomed city, besieged by the Achaeans. Now, all of this theory, as we might call it, has been accompanied by the spiritual wisdom taught him by Sam Fathers, along with practical instruction in the craft of hunting, so that when he assumes his place with the hunters, the wilderness and the bear itself provide the rest of his instruction. He goes to look for the bear, finding that if he's to encounter old Ben, he will have to cast aside his gun and his watch and his compass, any of the aids on which he has relied in the early stage of the game. When he was lost, he did as Sam had coached and drilled him. So Sam's coaching and drilling in the techniques of woodsmanship, the tales and wisdom of the past, along with the pride and humility in being included in so noble an undertaking, bring the boy into the territory of the bear. And the great presence finally shows himself as in a theophany. He manifests himself like a god to the boy. And he lost forever himself, tireless, eager, without doubt or dread, panting a little above the strong, rapid little hammer of his heart, emerging suddenly into a little glade, and the wilderness coalesced. It rushed, soundless and solidified. The tree, the bush, the compass, and the watch glinting where a ray of sunlight touched them. Then he saw the bear. It did not emerge, appear. It was just there, immobile, fixed in the green and windless noon's hot dappling, not as big as he had dreamed it, but as big as he had expected, bigger, dimensionless against the dimpled obscurity, looked at him, and then it moved. It crossed the glade without haste, walking for an instant into the sun's full glare and out of it, and stopped again and looked back at him across one shoulder. Then it was gone. Now this is one of the still moments of literature, a moment of vision almost unmatched. One thinks of Dante's sight of Beatrice, of Keats's hearing the song of the nightingale. The boy's entire life will be shaped by this experience, which would not have been possible for him without Sam's tale-telling and his coaching and drilling. The teacher did not produce the vision. However, the teacher must simply be convinced that the vision is possible, that what he teaches is real, and that he must ready the pupil himself to take the final steps. But the one doing the instruction, and indeed the whole community of hunters, must believe in the bear. And it's this aspect of the teacher's work that's in danger today. It's the belief in the mystery of the bear that is being lost in the schools. We seem to be trying instead to produce relevance, youngsters who will aim at nothing higher than the present practices of society. Now, in Isaac McCaslin's learning process, the boy experiences a paradox, both pride and humility, which is the response that teachers seek to evoke in the learner. Pride in being given such material, and humility in not being worthy to receive it. Sam Fathers was the host, the teacher. It's through him that the boy is allowed to participate as a guest in something permanent and eternal. But it's not simply content that works the transformation in Isaac, though the old tales are necessary to engage him. He has to be made himself to see. And that means that he cannot just hear about the bear, but must encounter it himself. This has been a long preliminary instruction for the boy. His grooming has been intense before he's taken along on the annual hunting excursion into the big woods, where he takes his own first step in shooting the deer and later allows the bear itself to teach him by leading him into strange and dangerous territory. So the teacher knows at what point to let the subject matter itself teach the pupils. After the teacher has summoned up the presences, evoked in the pupils pride and humility, allowed them to undertake their first venture on their own under the supervision of the elders, he turns them over to the pursuit of knowledge and wisdom on their own, watching, of course, back at camp and helping to interpret the experience later on. But the bear itself, in my analogy, the text being studied or the problem to be solved, teaches the novice in a way that teachers themselves could not. Thus the teacher becomes less and less as the pupil becomes more, but the authority of the teacher is not diminished. The process of instruction has convinced pupils of another dimension to reality, has taught them useful skills, and encouraged them to take their first steps into that realm, and finally turned them over to it, as we are told of Isaac's education. Faulkner says if Sam Fathers had been his mentor and the backyard rabbits and squirrels his kindergarten, then the wilderness that the old bear ran was his college, and the old male bear itself, so long unwifed and childless as to have become its ungendered progenitor, was his alma mater. So the bear itself, the thing to be learned, gives the final instruction. Go Down Moses, then, is not simply about the life and death of a way of life, for we're made aware in these episodes of the death of Sam Fathers, along with the death of the bear and the dog that bathes him, and later of Isaac himself. But it's about the way in which the teacher's transformative power functions by first creating in the pupil a belief in something invisible and valuable beyond the immediately relevant. And this part of the task is accomplished through the teacher's voice. Reading the great text alone will not do it silently. It's through the teacher's guidance, through the evocation of presences, the conjuring up of heroic tales of the past, so that its heroes are recognized as still meaningful, that the learner is transformed. Now, this is a major part of the educational process, making students understand what has preceded them in the discipline that they're studying. And next, through coaching and drilling, as Faulkner puts it, and finally by taking students into the forest of ideas and visions and allowing them to confront the bear itself. All this has to be governed by the teacher. And though we have to grieve that society does not recognize the true nature of this task, we still know that the need for it does not diminish. And we still know that we are preparing the young not just for success, but for struggles and hardships. And some of us intuit that in our time, those hardships may be greater than ordinary. As Donald Cowan wrote in his book Unbinding Prometheus, an age with which we are familiar has already ended. Now, he wrote this in the 70s. New forms and structures are already carrying the burden of the energies of our society. Young people sense this change in the depths of their being, and they're seeking ways to fulfill the new sort of tasks to which they're called. Educational systems in our time, he says, have for the most part ignored the realities of such a change and seek only to restore the structures of a former epoch, or else with a show of ingenuity to foster various fads. Later on, he says, when a potentially violent situation is triggered, it could set off explosive reactions in many areas at once, initiating a general conflagration of great magnitude. And he speaks of the uncomfortable premonition that some 30 years from the time he was writing, the social scene will contain imbalances interlocked enough for one misadventure to cause a general catastrophe. And he goes on, education in the specifically human qualities, what we've long called a liberal education, is the only heritage that we can give a generation that will have to make the transition and thus for a time bear the world on its shoulders like Heracles relieving Atlas. Actually, he says, the crisis is not 30 years away, not 10. The crisis is now, in our present classrooms, where future heroes sit expectantly, awaiting the formation of their souls in order to face whatever difficult tasks lie ahead. But back to our text for a few final remarks. Perhaps we should notice that the teacher figure in these Faulkner stories, Sam Fathers, though he's descended from Native American royalty, he occupies an ambiguous place in society. The boy's uncle, Cass Edmonds, and the hunters look up to him, and the boy reveres him, but he lives in a poor cabin. And though he is honored, he's not a part of ordinary society. He's in a class by himself, commanding his magic, summoning the presences, and engendering belief in his pupils. Like teachers in every epoch, he is above and apart from the society that works by the hour. For the teacher's reward lies in seeing his students encounter the great deer and knowing that if they persist, some of them will inevitably go on their own and encounter the bear.